I am Claire Mitchell, Doctor of Laws and King's Counsel.
And I am Zoe Venditozzi, Doctor of Laws, teacher and writer.
On the 8th of March 2020, International Women's Day, we launched the feminist Witches of Scotland campaign. The Witchcraft Act, in force between 1563 and 1736, saw thousands of people, mostly women, accused and executed as witches in Scotland, in the country's biggest and most brutal miscarriage of justice. Our campaign had three aims: to get a formal state apology for those accused of witchcraft, to obtain a pardon for all those convicted, and to get a national memorial to remember those involved in the Witchcraft Act.
On International Women's Day 2022, the first of our aims was realised when First Minister Nicola Sturgeon issued a formal state apology to those accused as witches. The first formal state apology ever. We are currently working with politicians to ensure there is legislation passed to pardon those accused as witches, to change their status from convicted witches to those who ought never to have been prosecuted. We continue our work to obtain a national monument so those who suffered will never be forgotten. Join us as we speak to the experts on the witchcraft trials, both here in Scotland and further abroad, as we explore the history of women in Scotland and continue the cultural conversation of what it means to be a woman. Hello and welcome to the Witches of Scotland podcast. Claire Mitchell and myself are delighted to welcome you along to episode 3 of season 2 of the Witches of Scotland. Now, today, Claire, we're having a slightly divergent topic, aren't we?
We are, well, in some senses, yes, in some senses, no. Oh, answered like a true lawyer.
Well
Thank you. What we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about what happened to a very, very brave woman in France. We'll come to that later. But we thought, because we wanted to talk about that, we'd also explore what happened to the women that were accused of witchcraft in France and see what their experience was. And I think in the future it might be good to actually get an expert in on, but we thought we'd just give you a few stories beforehand.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I think it's interesting as well to keep thinking about what happened in Europe in different ways, because recently we focused a wee bit, obviously, on Britain, naturally, particularly Scotland, and we focused on what happened in North America. But we have an expert coming up soon that we're going to interview about what happened in the Basque region, and it'd be great to get a French expert on as well, as you're mentioning. And it's always interesting to see what our neighbours were up to. Even though we were so close, there were quite different, shall we say, approaches in some ways. Ultimately fairly similar. You know, a lot of women were accused of being witches and executed, but slightly different stats and focuses.
We should also say that because we're going to be talking about the Pelicot trial, that there's going to be some quite distressing discussions about acts of sexual violence.
Yeah.
So if that part of the interview isn't for you, then just skip on and we'll see you in the next episode.
I would imagine, though, the vast majority of the women and men that are listening to this are already quite ready for, you know, horror, because the whole nature of this is pretty jarring and unpleasant.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Right,
But I just,
in advance.
yeah, but I just wouldn't want anyone sitting there thinking this
Oh
is
my
not.
God, I wish I knew. Like,
Uh-huh.
I think the fact that we're talking about modern events, it makes it a bit different, doesn't it? Because you can always give yourself a bit of distance when you're talking about hundreds of years ago until you really start getting into the detail of it. And then I think
Yeah.
past falls away to a certain extent. But anyway, we're running away with ourselves, Claire, and we're talking about the main part of the episode, and we're neglecting the initial parts of the episode people are expecting to hear. So I'm going to ask you now, Claire, what's been happening in the news?
News. Now, right back at you, Zoe, because before we came on this evening, Zoe had been researching and had been, in fact, in contact with.
Well, I've
And
reached out. They've not replied to me yet, to be fair, because
okay,
I only just emailed them.
okay, I like reaching out. I
I
like
reached,
reaching out
it's quite
across the
American,
pond. It
which
is
is
very
good,
American.
because it's an American story, Claire.
You tell the story, tell them the news.
Okay, so there is a case that's happening just now where more than 300 years after Maryland in America, in the United States of America, had their last documented witch trial, their state lawmakers are now thinking about a proposal that's been made to exonerate those who were accused of witchcraft in Maryland during the colonial era. It will, if it's passed, it'll absolve the 7 women and 1 man who faced allegations of conjuration, witchcraft, and dealing with evil and wicked spirits, which is how it was described in 1604 when they put together the legal framework for this. There is a woman called Heather Bagnall, who is the Anne Arundel County Democrat, and she is the person who's introduced the resolution. And here's a quote from her, which I think is really great and really chimes with what our campaign is, which is, "It's never the wrong time to do the right thing. We can't make them whole, but Maryland did repeal that law and we never exonerated the people that were harmed by it." So as well as exonerating them, it includes a formal apology to those who suffered because they were labelled witches. And it says, I'm reading this from an article in a newspaper called the Baltimore Banner, but they said that similarly to here, people were accused often based on personal sort of difficulties between people. That were fallouts, or there was an issue with religious intolerance, they were the wrong type of religion, or they weren't practicing the religion the way they wanted to be practicing it, or just plain old misogyny. So people are really interested. There seems to be a lot of local support for it. There is a lawyer called Elizabeth Puglisi Shaw. I think that's how you pronounce the first part of her surname. She's a lawyer from Howard County, and she runs the Maryland Witches Exoneration Project website. And she brought the idea for the resolution apparently to Bagnall, so they're working together. She's quite keen for people that are descendants of the accused witches to get in touch, because she makes the point that there's no stigma attached now, and people want to know, you know, sort of links and things, and all. People might not even realize actually that they were related to those people that were accused. Of course, America's in that situation, which is very, very different to Scotland, which is where, because they had really good records, they can actually find descendants, you know, provable, you know, verifiable paperwork, blah, 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 which we just don't have in Scotland. So no. It's always been interesting to us, isn't it, Claire, that when Americans talk about their links, they say my great, 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 you know, times grandmother, and they can prove it. Whereas here, people might have an idea that they were related. There might be a story that's been passed down through the family. They might have a surname in common and come from a particular area, and a really good guess that they're related distantly to somebody. But there isn't the proof here that there is in the States. No. It's a new entity.
You'd probably be able to say it was a probability or a possibility, but not beyond reasonable doubt.
No, again,
applying the D job.
Legal. I like that. There is mention in this article about a woman who was called Moll Dyer, who was never actually charged legally with being a witch, but she was a herbalist who lived in the county, the St. Mary's County, in the late 1600s. Not much is known about her, but it seems that she was a real woman. She got blamed for an epidemic of flu, fled into the woods away from a group of villagers who went there determined to burn down her cabin. She apparently died of exposure, and then that her story became local legend. The rock that she clung onto in the woods, people say it might or might not be cursed. And there's now built next to it the St. Mary's County Historical Society. And there's various interesting stories about it. One of them, which I think you'll find interesting, Claire, is that she's supposedly a source of the inspiration for the Blair Witch Project film, which is set in Maryland, but sorry to sort of spoil it, the co-director of the film, Eduardo Sanchez, said that they only found out about the similarities after they'd filmed. Those that believe in magic might suggest there's no such thing as coincidences. I couldn't possibly comment on that. So
I will comment.
One of the things that's nice about the Maryland issue is that the resolution that Bagnall's put together includes, and this is a quote from it, those who were indicted, forced to flee, banished, or acquitted who continued to live with their reputations destroyed and their family names tarnished. So what's really nice about that is that it covers people like Moll Dyer, but the people that were accused and it maybe didn't go anywhere, or in fact where there could have been sort of mob justice, where, you know, it wasn't done through law and people might have been injured or killed, or, you know, like they're saying they're banished or whatever. So I think it's really interesting. I'd be really keen to speak to them and see what their experiences of that, because there's been like several of these different cases in America where there's modern day people that realize, in the same way that we have, that no, this is a wrong that needs to be righted, and that there's no time limit on justice, as you would say, maybe, Claire.
Absolutely.
And that this is something that's really worth doing, particularly now in the context of what is happening and what is about to happen in America. It's very important to remember it, because, as we keep saying, it serves as a warning. I mean, it really does. And I mean, there's a really horrible kind of darkness behind the door that's just about to happen in America, and it's already happening, but it'll happen
That is
very soon.
that is such a writer's description, the darkness behind the door.
Look at us both flexing our other selves, isn't it? I'm surprised
Well,
at this stage in January that I've got any thoughts left in my brain. I feel like a mannequin that's just moving around doing things at the moment. Not ideal. It really
well,
isn't
this
ideal.
mannequin's doing a podcast, and you're doing very well. No,
Thank you.
it's really exciting to hear more people are looking for their across in the US. They have exonerations. We can't have exonerations here. We can have apologies, which we've had. We can have pardons. And it really does focus the mind. And hopefully, when we get them on once again, we'll be able to focus on part of the aims of this campaign, which is to pardon those who were convicted and have the document that everybody contributed to in such a positive way, the campaign document that was lodged at Parliament, and hopefully this year, Zoe.
Yeah,
I
no. And
I
I was
feel it's
about
a
to
lucky
say
year
that.
for us.
I was about to say that there'll be some people maybe that are listening that are thinking,
What about us?
that believe some stories that came out last year that said that
Oh
the
yeah,
issue had been kicked. What's that phrase? Kicked into the weeds?
picked into
Remember
the
that?
long grass.
Kicked. Well,
Yeah.
it's not. It's still in play. We've got a fantastic colleague who is beavering away and making different connections and things. So hopefully we'll have some news about that within this calendar year. I really hope
Don't. I was
so.
going to say, yeah, within the calendar year, I was like, Zoe, I think our listeners are very, very kind to us. And if having a relationship between yourself and the listener is all to do with trust, we have quite frankly violated that trust several times by giving timescales that we just couldn't keep to.
Now listen, I'm just going to argue a small point here, right? It's
Eh?
only a violation of trust
Mm.
if you've done it on purpose. Okay, we are just bumbling along in this experience called life, trying our best. And
We're
as I,
two middle class women just
as
doing
I
our best,
say,
Zoe.
I say frequently to my children, I'm just a woman trying her best. That's all I can do. And you're all
It's
just
like that. I'm just a man. We're just men.
just what is it? We're just an innocent, normal man.
Just innocent men.
Speaking of which, Claire,
Yes.
maybe we should talk about would you please back off corner? Just innocent,
like
normal.
how you've I like how you've put in, will you please feck off corner? I think what we decided to call it, although, it changes every week, will you just feck off corner? Now, Zoe, to be perfectly honest, between the last time that we did anything and now, quite
Uh-huh.
frankly, there's been so many people that I have mentally put in that corner that I would like have to buy a new four-bedroomed house to find some more corners to put more folk in.
I think essentially we're in the corner and they're taking up most of the space at the moment. That's what it feels like anyway. I'm still bravely battling on Twitter stroke X, despite the fact that lots of other people are saying to me, you need to stop using it, it's really bad. I just feel like there needs to be some people on there going, nah, to things that are said. I think that's really important.
And
Even if
and
that
God
feels pointless, I
God
feel
knows if there's anyone thrawn enough to stay there till the end, Zoe.
I'm
That's your
going to
good
keep
self.
going until it burns to the ground. And I will enjoy seeing some really fantastic repartee from clever people to stupid people that happens hourly on there. It is quite funny, but also very disturbing, because
Yeah.
you can see the rise, just as there was during the trials with the witch accusations, the rise of very right wing, sort of authoritative, very male energy, what I would call big D energy. And as I was thinking this week, it's often men that don't actually have it, but think they have it, and then are emulating it by just showing around.
Are
And
you trying to suggest that Big D energy might be sarcastic?
I mean, I just feel like all these guys are walking around as if, and there is guys are walking around, well, with a few kind of pick me girls, which I think is probably very similar to what will have happened during the witch trials as well. You'll have had some women, we know this, some women that got involved because they wanted to be part of the authority, they wanted to be part of the group that were in control. I'm sure there were some that were scared and so hid in kind of plain sight by taking the aggressor side. And I think that's just the nature and the psychology of patriarchy. But you can see that just now. But it is mostly, it's men who take exception to women. And I was going to say more with that sentence, like women getting degrees, women having jobs, women having opinions. But
Just stop
actually,
it, women.
it's with women, full stop, I
Just
think.
stop it, women.
Anyway,
So, who
who
we're
do we need to
putting
talk
with
about?
that intro,
Uh-huh.
who could we possibly be talk about? We could talk about a man who just sailed into British politics.
Yeah.
And the owner, is he the owner of X? I mean, is he
Yeah.
the ex-leader of it?
Yeah.
Is the owner?
Yeah.
The owner of X who sailed into British politics, calling one of our own female MPs an evil witch. And that is Mr. Elon Musk. I feel we should have some kind of like dun, no, no music or something like that behind it.
Yeah. Feel like we
And,
need to expand our music development department. There's a
and,
there's a
and
couple of tunes needing developed at the moment.
indeed, indeed. Well, the reason, I mean, there's lots of reasons we put him in the corner, but the particular reason for this is that Elon Musk decided to involve himself in a political debate about child grooming gangs. And he decided that of all the people that he was going to pick on, was the female MP who people have, victims and other women's rights organisations have come out and supported to say that she was an evil witch, amongst other things. There were other horrendous things he said about her,
Mm,
but he did so on the basis that he was purporting to care about women and children's rights.
yeah,
Now,
right.
exactly, exactly. So
There's
the
a high
way
chance that he's fathered so many children that he has no contact with anymore. He doesn't know what they're actually getting up to.
Well, I don't know if anyone saw, but there was an interview on Channel 4 with Kathy Newman and Jess Phillips. Um, and there was a conversation about what had happened to her as a result of him making these allegations against her. And what she says is, I've had to make changes to my life. Now, she went on not to be able to say what it was because presumably there were safety issues
Hmm.
that she was having as a result of threats given to her by Elon Musk calling her an evil witch and quote rape genocide apologist. Now, what happened after that allegation was made was there was a huge pile-on against her on Twitter, X, and that she says that basically in the middle of this storm, she's had to make significant changes to her life. And she says, and you have to consider risk in these situations, but I won't actually let it change my life. I've got a job to do and I'm going to crack on with that job. And Kathy Newman says, but there's an element of fear in your life now that there wasn't before. And she said, the element of fear that has existed in my life since the moment I was elected, since the moment I was a woman who spoke up for other women and girls, the element of risk is just elevated a bit of late. Now, horrific that she's in this situation now where she's had to make those changes, but also she makes the point that there was already an element of risk of being a woman in public life.
And this is
And
after Joe Cox was killed,
yeah,
the
yeah,
MP, some years ago, and like not that many years ago, like fairly recently, like it's completely insane that just because she is a politician, that men feel that they can make threats against her to rape her, to kill her, to hurt her
yeah.
family.
Kathy Newman said in the interview, she put it to her and she said, Elon Musk launched this attack after you rebuffed Oldham Council's request for an inquiry into historical abuse in the town. And she said to her in terms, do you stand by that decision not to hold an inquiry? And Jess Phillips says, so first and foremost, I didn't rebuff the request. What was suggested was that they do an independent local inquiry because I was part of the Telford inquiry. I supported the victims of the Telford inquiry before the inquiry. In fact, for many years before and then during the inquiry. And what I saw happen in Telford and thought they should have a national inquiry, and what I saw in Telford and I thought they should have a national inquiry before. What I saw was a process that put the victims at the heart of it. They led it. It felt completely responsive, but much more than that, it led to changes. And that's what I want to see in Oldham. So I didn't rebuff them having. I said that they should do what Telford had done because it's based on actual experience in the field and actually knowing what changes things and what doesn't. So we're seeing a situation where a woman in public life has actively tried to assist women and girls in respect of something, has been involved with campaigning, and as I said before, there are various groups that have turned up and supported Jess Phillips and says she's spoken for us. But with this comment of her being an evil witch and this apologist comment, she has suffered in public life a horrendous turning on over of people, and she's placed in fear. This is, when you talk about a witch hunt,
I was about to
that's
say,
a witch hunt.
if it'd been a man, it would have been described as a witch hunt.
Absolutely.
Because it's
Absolutely.
women, we don't tend to use that term as willy-nilly, shall we say? Willy-nilly.
So,
Yeah.
willy-nilly, with the emphasis on willy. So, who is going in this corner this particular weekend is none other than Elon Musk. He
Good.
can just go and take his army of
Racists.
yes with him.
Yeah. Because they don't really care about women and girls. Like, let's
Well,
be
if they
honest.
did, they wouldn't be threatening Jess Phillips. If they
Exactly.
cared about the truth, if they cared about women's safety, the really good way to do that is not threaten a woman.
I mean, he's got shit tons of money. If you're that bothered, plow some money into rape crisis centres, plow some money into things for women and girls, like particularly young teenage girls, so they're kept safe, so that they've got busy and good activities after school, so they're not taken advantage of by men, and just be really honest about it and actually understand the facts that living in the UK, you are far, 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 far more likely to be sexually assaulted by a white man that is known to your family. I mean, that's the actual story here, right? I'm not going to keep going on because actually I can feel myself getting really angry, and I'm just going to be chill. I'm going to be chill, Claire.
Okay. So we've put him in the corner
He's
amongst
very much in the corner.
very much in the
Very
corner.
angry. Yes.
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 And now, Zoe,
Yes.
moving from the 21st century, and will you just feck off corner, let's go to another corner of Europe, France.
Oh, en France. Oui, madame.
I like how you segged into your French accent there.
I'll do a fake French accent at the drop of a chapeau, as you well know, Claire
Oh
Mitchell.
dear. Oh
Oui,
dear. See if
oui.
we can possibly
Oh.
get through this. See if we can possibly get through this without Zoe expressing any of her views in French. This would be all good, but I fear we may have some
No, it's
wrong.
okay. I'll be sensible. I'll be sensible.
Okay,
Oui.
okay. So, because that we're going to be speaking about the Pelicot trial after this, I thought what we would do is look at what the witch trials were like in France. And again, as we said at the outset, we may try and find someone from France to come on and speak to us. But basically, between 1550 and 1700, we researched and found out that France had about 2,000 witch trials, with most of the people that were accused as witches. Do you think they were men or women, Zoe?
I'm going to guess they had vaginas. Le
They
vagine,
were,
as
they
they
were,
probably say in
please,
France.
no, no, they
But
don't.
that is it. It is
No,
that's
no.
France.
So about around 2,000 witch trials, with most of the accused being women. The first recorded witch trial in France was in 1390, the trial of Jeanne de Brugge, which resulted sadly in her execution. In 1617, 1670, Louis the 14th. The reason why I'm saying 14th, Zoe, is
You've
because
got X one V written, don't you?
yeah,
On your
yeah.
numerals.
So I had to. That wasn't the greatest, was it? I should really have
No,
done.
no,
Really
well
done.
done you, because I would have still been totting it up in my head. I'd be like, was
I
it Louis the 16th? Is it IV 4 or 6?
I know I could have called him Louis XIV. I could have called him that. So, interestingly enough, whereas our King James was going about shouting "Burn the witch" and having everyone killed, it was in fact Louis himself, apparently, who intervened to bring witchcraft trials executions to a halt and intervened and had them stopped. And it was said that a royal edict after the last witchcraft trial is often considered in France to mark the official end of those witchcraft trials. The same problem in France as we have in Scotland was that there was very, very poor record keeping because witch hunts were a local phenomena dealt with by the local, whatever the equivalent of the local borough is, the local ville, and as a result, most of the records weren't kept. So in France, again, the amounts that we're talking about here are very, very vague. Um, it was said that the witchcraft trials in France were affected by historical events going on at the time. And interestingly, the French had a slightly different religious aspect to the witchcraft trials. As we know in Scotland, what happened is the Reformation came in, the John the fourth, sorry, if you can edit that, that would be great. Um, uh, the Witchcraft Act was brought in by the new Protestant government and it was implemented by, amongst others, John Knox, the leading Protestant of his day. But in France, in fact, it was more complicated. The Protestant Reformation, it was said, impacted upon the accusation of witches. But in fact, when the Protestant Reformation came in, it was said that the number of witchcraft accusations actually decreased, along, interestingly, with the number of publications on the topic of witchcraft. And the reason for that was this coincided with Martin Luther and other reformers publishing critiques on papal authority and challenging the authority of the Catholic Church. So because they were challenging the Catholic Church, people were saying, maybe actually the Catholic Church endorsing the idea of witches isn't actually true. So, strangely enough, although in Scotland the Reformation led the charge to witchcraft accusations, over in France, the undermining of the Catholic Church by the Protestant reformers meant that people were less likely to believe the witchcraft accusations. It did point out, while it was discussing this in one of the articles that I read, that Malleus Maleficarum still did have a very large impact upon Europe and France as well when the witchcraft trials were on. And it said that the Malleus Maleficarum was the best-selling book. We'll talk about best-selling books later, Zoe. The best-selling book for over 100 years in Europe. Can you imagine that? So, what type of people were accused of witchcraft in France? Well, as a surprise, the type of people that were accused of witchcraft, mostly women, were usually people who were accused of things by their neighbours. They were tortured in order to elicit confessions, and the women targeted were described as typically marginalised women, such as spinsters, widows, or those without a male protector. Again, the same sort of stories as we find in Scotland, although, of course, as we know, sadly, anyone could be accused of witchcraft. Um, During the course of the witchcraft accusations in France, there were a lot of trials which we don't have records of, but we do have records of some of them. And in fact, the best kept records that would appear in Normandy, in northern France. And Zoe, there was one that I wanted to cite to you, was one of the earliest ones. Again, it was about about a relationship which had gone wrong between lovers. And I'll read this out. And I might say that this is read from the Library of Congress online, which sets out these details. The case of Margot de la Barre and Marion de la Droiture were the two women first interrogated in relation to an accusation of witchcraft, and this was very early on in the 14th century, 1390. The accusation against them was the casting of a spell on the former lover of Marion and his wife. To regain her lover, Marion had been advised by a friend to share a drink with her former lover made of a few drops of her menstrual blood mixed with red wine. Margot said she'd obtained two recipes, the first based on herbs gathered during the magical night of St. John, which was to provoke impotence with her former lover and the wife, and the second was intended to arouse desire for her again, which involved roasting the testicles of a white rooster, grinding them into a powder, and putting it in his pillow for 9 days before mixing it with his food and wine. By themselves, these misdeeds were confessed by the accused at their first questioning and did not merit the death penalty. But after sessions in the torture chamber, both admitted that they'd done this as witches and had invoked the devil, and therefore both of them were executed. The reason I picked out that particular trial, Zoe, was it caught my eye about the story of menstrual blood being used in the
Yeah.
witch's spell. And when I spoke to you about it, you said that that's something which occurs in later ideas of women
Well,
committing
current
craft.
ideas. I have seen, I mean, I've obviously not done this, obviously, but there is stuff that I've seen on like reels and stuff like that where young women, well, women, I suppose, not necessarily that young women, have talked about putting menstrual blood in, this is so gross, in like bolognese type sauce, like tomatoey sauces, feeding it to your boyfriend, and then it supposedly gives you this power to then be like in his mind and he thinks about you all the time because you're kind of like bonded.
I tell you what, see if someone did that to me, I'd think about them all the time. I'd think they're nuts, and I would
Yeah.
take out orders on them not to come anywhere near me.
Yes. Yeah. I
That's
know
why I would think about them
you're,
all the time.
but I think that's the kind of like there's like an aspect of like modern day sort of ideas about magic and stuff like that. I'm not sure if these women would necessarily see themselves as witches. And obviously it's probably entirely just an urban myth. I really hope that people
Drop.
are doing
Okay, no.
that. Hope. Ugh.
Which part of it is the urban myth? The idea that it was happening?
Yeah.
Or,
I mean,
okay, yeah.
obviously, I mean, I doubt that putting your period blood in somebody's bolognese would make them think about it all the time. But then I don't know. Maybe
I mean,
if you believed in magic, I don't. Who knows? Who
I
knows?
would,
Presume you do it without their consent. I mean, you're not saying to them,
yeah,
"Hello,
please don't do it. First of
period
all, I think it's
pasta."
an assault. I think it's an assault
Yeah,
if you're doing it without their consent.
yeah.
And, health and safety issues, you're not an employer, but I really do feel that that's kind of
And
is
if it's cooked
not
hot
a
enough,
healthy thing.
would it? I don't. I
It,
mean, I don't know what the hygiene aspects are of.
I mean, the hygiene aspects are just don't do it.
I mean, I wouldn't do it. I don't.
No,
Yeah. I don't think I'm
no,
capable at this age anyway, but anywho, without going into
no.
too much detail there.
Don't,
But
don't.
yeah,
I mean, we can take firm views on some things, and that's definitely one.
I
I
don't
think I'm definitely
know.
saying
It's
no,
very gross. No,
it is gross.
it's
No.
horrid. But what happened in France, though, that's the story that was one of the things they were accused of, which is pretty compelling, isn't it? Because the idea about women and periods and the fear of women and sexuality and fertility and it's a big love triangle story and it's like really compelling. You could imagine that it would have really gripped people, that story.
Yeah. Well, one thing as well about it is like doing all those things, they did all those things and they cast those spells, and that wasn't going to get them an execution. And then they get tortured. They said, yeah, we did invoke the devil. And then they're like, oh, you invoked the devil. Sorry about that. That's demonic possession. You're a witch, and now you
But
must die.
so using the menstrual blood in
No,
itself wouldn't have been necessarily problematic. It was because the devil was involved in the process.
Yes, yeah.
Like just as exactly as in Scotland, I suppose.
It said that very closely tied with witchcraft was the idea of demonic possession. And the more we've read about it and written on it in our new book, the more we see the idea of the possession of the woman by the devil, the fact that she was his vessel, the fact that she still had no power, that it was the devil working through her,
Yeah.
and allowing the devil to work through her. Was really, really important, and it was really important in France. I would just say one other thing about some of the last trials that took place, which were in Normandy again, near Rouen. It was kind of marked one of the last bout of witchcraft accusations, and strangely enough, bucking the trend, even though we said at the start that the vast majority of them were women, in these last witchcraft trials, it says intriguingly that most of the accused were men and they were shepherds.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure, it doesn't give us any more information than that. So if we do manage to find a French expert in the witchcraft trials, I'd kind of like to know how shepherds got to be in situations where they're being accused of witchcraft.
I mean, I suppose that shepherds, full disclosure, I don't know anything about this, so I'm just freestyling what the idea might have been. I'm imagining that shepherds were away from the rest of the community for long periods of time and were away, up in the hills and in the mountains and that sort of thing, and might have been seen potentially as maybe a little bit peculiar, and that it was the company of, small groups of men potentially. I don't know, maybe they were outcast in the same way that you saw women that were outcasts being accused. We just weren't a firm member of the society, the community which they were in, and therefore sort of easy to pick on.
Yeah, I'd not have thought of a shepherd as being an antisocial job.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, we're not talking about like one man and his dog type shepherds. I'm talking about like shepherds that lived away from the community for long periods of time. This is entirely based on novels I've read, though,
Oh
not
dear.
read by shepherds and not modern day shepherds. But like, like the idea of shepherds in the olden days was that
Mm.
they were away from the community for really long periods of time. I'm confidently just carrying on with this line of thought, but
Yeah, just
not,
do that. Lead
not true.
lead the listeners like
Yeah.
the very sheep of the shepherds.
If there are any shepherds listening who have got an insight into that, please let us know. I think we should move on.
We should move on.
Yes.
But before we move on, I think we should remember those women in France that were accused of witches, that most definitely weren't witches, and that paid with their lives. We must remember all those that were accused as women, not witches.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's move on to modern day France. We've got a really interesting interview today, I think, which, as we said before, on the face of it, it's not directly about witches, but it is about the way in which women can be treated and diminished. And this is, as Claire's already mentioned, distressing at times. So we would have no negative judgment of you if you thought, no, this is not for me. I'm strictly here for the witch content. And we will go back straight away to witch content again next week. But we thought this was very timely and something that we really wanted to talk about when you know. Hello, we are absolutely delighted to have today a special guest who is coming to us from, I believe, France. Is this true?
Yes,
You are in
bonsoir
France.
or
Oh,
bonjour, depending on which time of the day this goes out.
Bonsoir,
like that
bonjour.
covers everything. Because it's a
Bon.
podcast, people could listen to it anytime. So it's all going to be relevant.
Exactly.
Like that. So today is, on the face of it, we were just saying, not the most obvious witch angled story, but I think it'll become clear during our conversation exactly why it is we've invited our guest on today. I'm actually going to ask our guest to introduce herself and tell us why it is that she is here today. Madame.
Well, my name's Annette Young, and I'm the host and creator of the 51%, a show about the women who are reshaping our world, which is broadcast every Friday, a fresh edition on France 24 English. And if you're interested in what we do, and I'm sure if you're listening to this, one would assume you might be interested in what we do. You can find us on france24.com. Just type in the 51%. The title of which, believe it or not, it might be obvious to some, but it's not obvious to many. Why 51%? Because in many parts of the world, women make up 51% of the population, but sadly do not have the equal amount of representation, be it in the field of politics, business, you name it, and I'm sure, given who I'm talking to, you're very well aware of the issues that we cover. One of which, one of the most wonderful specials we did was back in 2022. Would you believe it?
Oh my God.
Really? Was
So
it that long ago?
that long ago, where I came to Scotland and interviewed Zoe and Claire about their work for Witches of Scotland, and we dedicated a whole show to the subject, and we loved it. We had a grand old time, except it was raining in August.
It was. I remember we met at the house in Dundee, and it was absolutely dreich, to use a good Scottish term.
I'd like to pretend that
peeing
was
down.
regular.
Just as a side note, for a long, complicated reason, I had just managed to get my French driver's license. I had an Australian driver's license, and you can tell from my accent that's where I'm from, but I had to let it expired. So long and short of it is I had to, because of bureaucracy here in France, reset the whole French driver's test. And so the first time I had got back into a car, apart from the test itself, for a long drive, was driving up to meet you. And the weather was horrific. And I was with my crew, and I just kept thinking, I hope they have no idea that it's been a long time.
Oh no.
The wheel.
Well, I'm
you
glad
got
that you
there
managed to
safely.
get up there to
Yeah.
get up to see us. We know
did.
we know that the French have got more than, I think, in our experience, I think, Claire, tell me if you think this is wrong, but they've had more of an interest in our campaign and about the idea of witches, both of the historic sort and of modern day interpretations, than I think just about any other country apart from maybe America. So I think we've had a lot of French interest.
Also Catalonia, who
Catalonia, yes.
took her campaign and then pardoned their
But
witches.
there's quite close historical ties between the two countries, obviously, the Mary Queen of Scots, and I think the French feel a greater affinity, if I may say, towards Scotland than maybe your Sassenach neighbours. I don't know.
The Auld Alliance between
Yeah.
Scotland and France. The person who signed the Witchcraft Act was Mary Queen of Scots, but of course she married the Dauphin of France. And there's where my history knowledge ends. Said knowledgeably.
Yeah, but I think that's okay. That'll do.
That's fine.
So what in particular are we going to talk about today then? Claire?
Well, I contacted Annette because I saw that she had been following the Pelicot trial, and I wanted to understand from her what the current feeling is in France in relation to whether or not this is a huge pivotal moment. Because when we met the last time in that graveyard in 2022, we talked about the Me Too movement, we talked about why it was important to remember the history of women, because women are still not equal in society and there are still deep-grained societal problems. And we talked about misogyny here, the misogyny in France, and sadly we had similar stories, although I think the misogyny in the UK is slightly more subtle now than it is in France, but it doesn't mean that it's not there in Scotland. It just means that it's not as perhaps obvious as to detect as it currently still is in France. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to find out what the view of you, Annette, was on these things.
Now, you and I have talked about the Pelicot case a lot, so we both know what we're talking about, but it might be helpful if, Annette, if you could give us a kind of a brief overview for anybody that doesn't maybe live their lives terminally online like we do.
Mind you, I would probably argue that Gislèle Pelicot is probably the most famous French woman these days, short of Marie Antoinette, because of the nature of this case and the horrific story that we heard about what she'd been subjected to. Just in short, back in 2020, a retired electrician by the name of Dominique Pelicot was picked up by a security guard in a supermarket in the south of France because he had been filming women upskirting, as they call it, which is effectively where you put a camera or drop the mobile phone camera so that you can film underneath their skirts and dresses. And a very savvy security guard saw what was happening, confronted him. In fact, there's even imagery. There's a video of the actual conversation they had because somebody recorded it and reported him to the police. As a result, the police went to visit Dominic Pelicot, initially obviously was detained, but they then went to visit his house and seized his computers, and to their horror, discovered thousands upon thousands of files of his wife, who has since divorced him, Gislèle Pelicot, being sexually abused by strangers that he had recruited online. More importantly, the other horrific element of this story is the fact that he drugged her unconscious. And this happened over a period, best part of a decade, they believe. At that time, it began when they were still living in the outskirts of Paris, and then they retired and moved to Mazan in the south of France, not far from Avignon, where the court trial was heard. Through the internet, managed to recruit dozens of strangers and entice them to come and have sex with his wife, even though she was completely unconscious. So after discovering this, they called Gisèle to the police station, sat her down, and she watched what they had just themselves uncovered and obviously was devastated.
Oh my God. They actually showed her in the police station what happened.
They did. And so this bits and pieces about this trial started to emerge when the arrests were made. But we had no idea as to the sheer numbers of men involved until the trial got underway in Avignon in early September 2024. And that's when it really just hit the headlines. They managed to detain somewhere around 51 men, one of which was Dominic Pelicot, who's now 72. They believe that there was at least another 20 who had participated, but they were unable to identify them.
My God.
So there are 20 men out there possibly who know what they've done, but have yet to be picked up or arrested by the police.
And these weren't necessarily men that were already sex offenders. I mean, you know, convicted sex offenders.
No. I mean, some of them, as we discovered through the course of the trial, did have some previous, offences, but the bulk of them were, as the French media dubbed them, Monsieur Tout le Monde, Mr. Everybody, Mr. Everyman.
Mm-hmm.
And they ranged in ages from 24 to 72. They were, a bulk of them were in relationships, married, fathers. One was a journalist, one was an IT consultant, another was a firefighter. They, truck drivers,
ordinary men
nurses.
just walking amongst people in their villages and towns and cities, just living their lives. And you used the word earlier that Dominic Pelicot enticed the men. And I was thinking, yeah, it's interesting because there can't have been much persuasion involved. Like these men, you don't surely, I mean, I'm not a pervert, so I'm not sure entirely how this would work.
I'm glad you specified that in advance, Zoe,
Thank you. Just in case there was people were unsure about my pervert standing, I'm not a pervert. But I would imagine that you're not just in a golf chat on somewhere on the internet and a guy goes, hey, do you want to come around and have sex with my wife while she's drugged? These guys are presumably going and looking for other.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
there are groups.
They were on a website called coco.fr, which has since been shut down by authorities because it sort of basically operates in the dark web. And there was a forum called Without Her Knowledge.
Oh, God. Oh.
And that's where he recruited these men. But the thing I just want to underline here, these were not men who came from all points of France. They all lived within 30 minutes driving range of their home.
Yeah, so these were just the local
men
that decided to take part in this. if we extrapolate it, we assume in that particular area, it's not got some particular interest in that, and therefore, if we extrapolate that over the whole course of France and of the world, that is horrifying.
And I think that is the most horrendous element of this story, is the nature of who these people are. We have heard it a lot of times, and particularly people like ourselves who report on feminist issues, that the bulk of perpetrators of, sexual violence are known to the victim.
Yeah.
Or, operate within the community, or it was somewhere. I think what makes this horrible was, first of all, she did not know them. Apparently there's one that she vaguely knew, but she'd never come across any of these men. But they lived in her community. They lived close to her home.
And it's not even as if he insisted that they used protection. That she apparently has STIs as a result of it, or had STIs. There was one man who was HIV positive who refused to wear a condom. I mean, what could Dominique Pelicot possibly have thought would happen? That he would just get away with it forever? I mean, I suppose he got away with it for 10 years. We know that there's a history of women not being taken seriously by a lot of medical professionals. And we know that Gislèle Pelicot had gone to her doctors in various points and said, I don't feel right, there's something wrong here. But I am sure it will have been shrugged off as, it'll just be the menopause, it's post-menopause, this is what happens to women, you're getting older. She probably thought she was starting to get dementia or something.
Well, she did. She did. And in a couple of cases, he accompanied her to these appointments and even went with her to have an MRI of her brain. So it's the more, in so many layers, it has so many points about the patriarchy and the failure of society to acknowledge women, be it reporting sexual assault, but we're not talking about that. We're talking, as you say, just even the normal day-to-day things of somebody coming in saying, I'm suffering from memory loss. My children are concerned. She had registered STIs. And nobody had connected the dots. Because
how could you possibly, unless they didn't test her for STIs and they kept putting it down to other things, how else could you explain away getting STIs other than the fact that your partner is having sex with somebody else, or the most bizarre, idea, which is that somebody's having sex without your knowledge with you?
I think, and I don't know the gender of all the doctors, because I have to declare at this point I wasn't covering the trial day in and day out. I know that a number of them gave evidence. But again, it's the assumptions that society has that must have been the husband's playing up or having affairs, hasn't told the wife.
That's their business and we're not getting
involved. It's their business, we won't get involved, but not sort of the memory loss and all these other ailments that she was experiencing. And, so you've got that situation. Of course, that's created a massive debate about, training healthcare officials and professionals as such about to be aware of drug-facilitated sexual assault. And I would say most of our generation are not, because it is something that is growing in numbers. And I know in the UK, there's been a big thing about drink spiking and so on. But, it's something that has only happened or emerged in the last, 10, 15, 20 years, to the best of our knowledge. But having said that, I mean, it's just on so many levels, there's this just, as a journalist and as someone observing this story, is just you look aghast at what you're hearing and listening and witnessing.
And you've said that it started cultural conversations, about the medical issues. It's also started a cultural conversation about the definition of rape in France. Now, I don't want to get all technical, but
especially with you, Claire.
No, but essentially, in France, the lack of consent isn't the central pillar of the crime.
That's right. There is no recognition of consent in the current French rape laws. this has sparked a debate that obviously this has to change. But it says, can I just go back a step? Because I think for English-speaking listeners or people who are interested in France would be saying, how is this happening in a country where you have what we call the Republican values, les valeurs de républicain, liberté, égalité, fraternity. This is a country that prides itself on supposed equality. But I think for me, having lived here as an Australian for the best part of 14 years now, I realise that France is very way behind the English-speaking world when it comes to women's rights and the way in which women are viewed. And we've seen that with the fact that Roman Polanski could come and live here. We saw that even recently with President Emmanuel Macron being asked about Gérard Depardieu, who we know is facing a number of charges of sexual assault, the trial of which will begin in March, saying, I don't want to take part in a manhunt, when he was asked by a journalist at a press conference about the story. It is, why is there so much of a difference? That's probably potential subject for another podcast, but there is a definite difference. I think it's driven by the Latin culture, but it's also driven by the fact that France has still yet to come to terms with some basic principles of laws protecting women and particularly survivors of sexual assault.
Well, hopefully this conversation and what has happened will spur that on. I know I was reading an article in Politico which said that the definition of the crime is now being reconsidered to add consent, because the French law of rape was any act of sexual penetration of any kind whatsoever committed by violence, coercion, threat, or surprise. So technically, if you read that, which is violence, coercion, threat, or surprise, the issue of consent isn't central to that. Whereas our law changed about 20 years ago to say that the issue of consent must be front and centre in any crime. The idea of that was to not always make it the woman's job to say whether or not she was, what she was doing and what she was doing, but to make the investigation into the issue of consent as being an issue between two parties, to throw light on what the man is doing in those circumstances, and to say, what is the understanding between these two parties? Now, of course, in cases like we've got the Pelicot case, there would be, and for poor Mrs. Gislèle Pelicot, there would be no question whatsoever that if you make someone unconscious, you don't have their consent. And also in our law, if you spike someone, if they are too unable to consent because of intoxication, even if you haven't spiked them, that overcomes any issue of consent, because you wouldn't be spiking someone if you knew they already were consenting to you. So that was a step forward, although the law still really struggles with the issue of consent and how you define it, which sounds really silly. You're like, surely we know that when we see it, but it's been really, really difficult. But in a case such as Gislèle Pelicot's, it's so straightforward. But one of the most amazing things that I think she did, and one which put a finger on an issue that I've been kind of worried about in dealing with these sorts of crimes for a long time, is the protective way that the law now comes in and says we must protect women, we must keep them from any kind of publicity, which of course, if people want that, that's absolutely proper and fine. But there was an underlying feeling of shamefulness, or shame about sex, and shame about people being sexual people. So to talk about sex,
it needs to be covered up for the women's benefit, because it's ruined her now. So her life is ruined. And so to protect her going forward, we don't talk about that. You know, I think that's really interesting. So
Yeah,
then,
I mean, I'm not saying, sorry, Zoe, to interrupt. I'm not saying that if somebody wants their privacy,
oh
which of
no,
course they're
100%. Yeah,
entitled
yeah,
to,
yeah.
that they are absolutely entitled to that. But those who want to say, no, here I am, this is what I want to say, this is my story, this is the way I want to tell it. For those that take that route, she's an absolute inspiration.
Yeah.
She is indeed. And the fact she waived the right to remain anonymous is another extraordinary element of this story. And we would never know about it. I mean, maybe would know about the fact because of the sheer numbers of men. I mean, they had to build a special enlarged glass box for the courtroom in order to fit them all in.
It
So
was
that itself,
51.
yeah, it would have, I mean, you know, it would have attracted attention. But the fact that she, you know, went public. But the thing also is how we treat victims or survivors of sexual assault in court cases. And the fact that you had, for the first time, clearly a grandmother, clearly drugged unconscious, and there's filmed evidence. And she still had some rather disturbing questions asked of her by the lawyers representing the defendants. So it was I think for France in general, on so many levels, suddenly people really started to understand what it meant for a woman to go public with these accusations and the whole process. And the issue of consent, as one of Gislèle Pelicot's lawyers said, how is it we're in 2024 and these men thought it was perfectly acceptable to accept the statement from Dominic Pelicot? Yes, my wife's agreed. Yes, you know, not an issue, not a problem. How can you think that is indeed consent, which means that there's a long way to go in terms of public education? And also in terms of just
I mean, that's at the very best. If you assume that they were thinking, oh, she consents, so that's fine. I mean, that's the best possible way of looking at it, and even then, that's absolutely horrific. But the question has got to be asked: how many of them even cared or bothered? You know, it was just yeah, she consented, yeah, whatever.
Because we've accepted porn to such an extent and sex work to such an extent that actually it's normalized a whole bunch of behaviors that actually they're not normal and they're really unpalatable. And you know, I don't want to kink shame anybody, you do you sort of thing, you do whoever you want to do, but we have normalized a lot of stuff that has really like kind of tipped over where you know where the line's drawn. Like I was thinking at the same time as the Gislèle Pelicot case was going on, we had the story of the two women with OnlyFans accounts. So there was the one girl where a documentary came out about her having had sex with 100 men in one day. And anybody who's worked with anybody with trauma, when you see her talking to the camera, she's so clearly traumatized by her experience. And she had a team, I think, of 9 people around her, and she's generating income for them. Like the women, I mean, this is the thing that really stuck out for me with this one, is that at the end of it, she had really sore eyes because despite the fact that she'd told them not to, some of the men ejaculated on her face and it had gone in her eyes, right? Now, she's given consent in that situation. You'd be hard-pressed probably to argue that she hadn't, but that's a very clear point of it where she has clearly not given consent, but that still happened. And then there's the other case of the other young woman who I think is also British that's made a real thing about going and having sex with like 18-year-old boys. And that normalizes this whole idea for young boys about this is what women are. Women are just there for our gratification. They'll do anything as long as I pay the OnlyFans fee. If I want to go and line up with 99 other men and just to have sex into that woman's body, it just makes me feel so upset and repelled.
There was a great Substack written, I think her name is Sarah Dittum or Ditum, Ditum. She writes for the Times and the Guardian. She's a columnist and author, and she was writing about this case. And she said, just cast your mind back to 25 years ago. And if there was some weird guy out there who wanted to have sex with a toaster, well, you know, if he posed the question to any of his friends, they would have immediately, you know, said, that way to a psychiatrist or psychologist, or you've got to be joking, you're off your head. Fast forward, we now have the internet and Google, and you can just type in, I want to have sex with a toaster, and goodness knows how many forums pop up. So this is the thing.
Are sticking their penises into electrified appliances. I mean, I'd be all for the rise of toasted sex. That would solve a lot of problems in one.
Yeah, but we are so way behind, and I know I would defer to you on this issue, Claire. The laws, legislation, politicians are all playing catch up literally all the time with all these issues. And secondly, when we've raised a generation of empowered women, but we've failed to raise a generation of men how to deal with empowered women, and in terms of and their relationships and how they view women in the 21st century.
The problem is that the empowered women are actually empowered to be, I don't want to sound like some sort of Marxist lunatic here, but it's all like a neoliberal.
Why not to, Zoe?
It's about women being empowered to make money from their sexuality, right? Now, on the one hand, as a feminist, I argue, again, you do you, but it's gone so far in a direction now where there's so much content and so much of it, I understand, is free, that women are pushed to go further and further and further and further. At the end of the day, we're human bodies. We're not Elon Musk's sex robots. Do you know what I mean? We have normal human bodies. And I just think about poor Gislèle Pelicot and how much stress and physical pain she must have been under. Because if somebody was coming in and having sex with her and she wasn't involved in that, then she must have been hurt by it. And she must have woken up the next day swollen and in pain, and just to not know what was causing that. It's so distressing. It's so horrible.
Can I say that I think, having watched everything that's gone on, I am more and more of the view that when women go to court for sexual offences or for violence against them, they should have their own legal representation. That's what I think.
Absolutely.
Because what happened before was, certainly in the UK, lawyers could ask any sort of questions, and then they're like, oh, we can't do that, so we'll bring in new laws about that. And then now complainers, they can't be asked this question, but they can still be asked that question. And the agency of the person that's involved in the process, the person who's seeking justice, doesn't have that agency. And the more I watch what's happening around the world, and the more that I see that violence remains, sexual violence, non-sexual violence remains one of the top problems in the country, the more I think when women go to court, they need their own lawyers to represent them in a case. So you would have the accused, but you would have a complainer, and that complainer would have their own lawyer to fight for their rights, to give them a voice in court.
Because who's looking after them? Because the idea that we have is that the wheels of justice are looking after these women. But and I firmly believe that if you've been accused of a crime, you absolutely should have a lawyer to defend you. Innocent till proven guilty, etc., etc. I really, really believe in that. But at the same time, if a woman, and we know that this has always happened and still happens, it happened, as you've already alluded to with Gislèle Pelicot, that the defence will drag the woman to try and, often cause a case. Claire, tell me if I've got this wrong, but to cause doubt in the court's mind that this woman's telling.
Well, actually, Zoe, in Scotland, that was historically the case, that women were allowed to be asked anything. And then the law over time changed, and then the courts became more fierce at enforcing the law. So now it's very, very much the case that any questions asked of a woman in a court are basically sieved through the court system first, so they can be vetted, so that the questions are there. The difficulty always is, of course, if someone's saying, I have been sexually assaulted, and the person accused is saying, no, you haven't, there always has to be a test, because of the system that we work in is adversarial. So there are going to be questions, but for the greatest part, those ought to now be very much assessed by the court, which is why when you watch TV shows where defence counsel are allowed to rip into defendants, complainers, asking all sorts of inappropriate questions, I get really annoyed, because I think if people think this is how it is, if they're watching it in Scotland, I can only speak for Scotland, people will be put off making the complaint because they think they will be questioned in this way when in fact they won't. So, in saying that, I'm not saying everything is good in Scotland, and I don't think it's going to get better because I think the law is doing what it can and it's still not enough. I think women have to have representation as in the courtroom representing their interests. The prosecutor represents the public interest. The defence counsel represents the person accused. I think the woman who's saying that she has been accused or that she has, sorry, been subject to a sexual assault or any kind of assault, a domestic violence assault, although I don't like the term domestic violence, but if any woman has been subject to that kind of thing, they should have representation in court to put forward their position and their side.
I'd just like to follow up on that point because from where I am in France, I think there's a couple of key issues that have emerged from this, which apply also elsewhere in the world. First of all, convictions for rape are rare in this country. According to the New York Times, 94% of reported cases were dropped in 2020. This was according to a report last year by the Public Policy Institute in this country. So, it shows that clearly there's a problem there for women reporting rape. Secondly, the Me Too movement didn't take off in this country the way it did in the English-speaking world. Back in 2017 and 2018, when it started to emerge, Catherine Deneuve, along with 99 other prominent French women, wrote a tribune, as they say in French, an open letter, which was published in Le Monde, saying, this Me Too movement has gone too far. It's very Anglo, it's very puritanical, and in France we're all about the culture of seduction. So I think this case has done something that Me Too has failed to do, and that is start conversations everywhere about how women are treated when it comes to any form of sexual interaction. And I would also say, in terms of this case, what it has done is shine a light on drug-facilitated sexual assault, because again, it's not enough is known about this. I know the UK has in fact been leading the charge. I think their talking is, am I right, Claire, in criminalising it, or there was some discussion?
In Scotland, the common law would deal with spiking because that would be an assault. If you do something to someone to harm them, in that way, you could certainly argue that would be an assault. And also in our law, we have that if people are unable to give consent because of drink or drugs, then consent is deemed not given in law. So the statute always deals with that. The difficulty, of course, is that whilst the statute can say that, a jury is left to decide, was the person drunk enough? Could they consent? Could they not consent? So it helps, but it doesn't remove the issue.
But what it has done, I think, is shone a light on the issue in terms of alerting people, healthcare workers, police officers, anyone involved in the criminal justice system, that this clearly is a problem. It is something that needs to be addressed. And as a result, I know in the French police there are now discussions, and in fact they've started, I think, some mini training courses for police officers to identify victims of drug-facilitated sexual assault. So in terms of what comes out of this in a positive way, I really hope that as a result, particularly in this country, which badly needs this conversation to be had at all levels, that people are now thinking about the whole issue of sexual violence and how it is an epidemic. Finally, I will just say this. As someone, as well as hosting and producing a women's program, I'm also a news presenter. The number of times in a bulletin where we talk about women being the victims of sexual violence happens constantly. And if anything, again, comes out of this story is global recognition that this is not an epidemic, it's a pandemic. And society needs to address this issue urgently. It's been made a million times worse by social media. And the fact that we have failed in educating boys and men about proper healthy sexual relationships.
It's a mess. It's actually a mess. I went to an exhibition in the Baltic Art Gallery in Newcastle the day before yesterday. And one of the things they had there was a really interesting retrospective of a photographer and campaigner and activist called Frankie Raffles, who lived in Scotland and actually was at St Andrews University and then worked in Edinburgh and various other places. And I hadn't realised that she was involved with the Zero Tolerance campaign that was launched when I went to university in 1992, I think it was. So I would have been 17. And it was an incredible thing that I would like to see actually just replicated exactly as it was. There were black backgrounds and it was called Zero Tolerance, and there was a big white Z in the middle. And it was very hard-hitting photographs that she'd taken where it was just women and girls. And the text was very minimal underneath. And it was things like, one of the posters was, and these were everywhere, they were in bus stops, they were, on the side of buildings, like that. It was really impactful. And one of the pictures was two little girls just playing with toys on the carpet. And it said words the effect of underneath of, by the time they're 18, one of these girls will have been sexually assaulted. There was another one saying that from the ages of 9 to 93, women are sexually assaulted. We need to start putting that back out again instead of going like, all sex is cool. We need to be like, we're not talking about that. We're talking about consent and how widespread the issue is and how it must stop and how we won't tolerate it, because it's things like the Tate brothers, the kind of bullshit that they've said online, the fact that some men who are making money out of that are using those things. It's ultimately men making money from the structures of things like OnlyFans and the internet and porn sites. And it's just horrifying. And I'm just going to circle back to why this is linked to our witch campaign. And it's because, once again, it's about women being the people that come off worse in a situation. When things get tough, it's women that become the victims of things often. We're going through a period of time in society where we are scared about climate change, about impending war, about current conflicts, about potential food scarcity, all those things. And we know that from the past with the witches, when they were accused, we know that the research with that supports that when you're going through societal changes, we look for victims and they're the ones that get accused. And again, it's women, it's overwhelmingly women because they don't have the power. So we need to have our eyes absolutely open about this as women, and we need to keep talking and keep up the energy that was generated during the Pelicot case.
So, Zoe, I don't know if you saw there was a thing online which was being retweeted, and it was about a man musing about how hundreds of years ago, when women were able to consent to marriage when they was 14, there wasn't any trauma then. So really, these things are really just societal norms. And I mean, thankfully, the backlash was, "You idiot! Of course there was trauma then."
There are lots of men that do believe that think we need to return to the good old days where women got married really young and they popped out babies and they lived in some sort of, paradise in the countryside.
We're going to start shouting about trad wives in a minute,
But
Annette.
that's why trad wives are popular. It's
It
very
is.
head in the sand and thinking if we went back to old-fashioned values, i.e. women being even more subjugated than we are now, men would be happy. Fuck off. Like that, I'm sorry. I know that's quite rude. I think the French will forgive it. But I just think that we get together.
We're seeing that already in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And who gives a shit about that? There's still
and the fact that they've now, I don't know whether you've heard this, their latest measure is that anyone who has a window overlooking a building where a woman can be seen needs to brick up that or block out that window. So basically, they want women to live in the dark.
Just in case somebody sees them. And what are we doing about that? Nothing. We're doing nothing about it.
Exactly. And I mean, that's obviously about ending gender apartheid. But the other thing I would say, if you put a white supremacist in the same room as a jihadist, what is the thing that they're going to immediately find in common? Their views about women.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we are seeing now a massive backlash towards women and women's rights. And we're now seeing the emergence of authoritarian leaders and far-right leaders.
I mean, as I say, more red flags than all the handmaids' gowns sewn together. It's terrifying times. But there are outliers. There are women like Gislèle Pelicot who take a stand, and as a result of what she has done, has started a conversation in France, has started a conversation worldwide, and for me has really solidified, as I said, this sort of idea that we must give women agency in these sorts of proceedings. And if that has to be rolled out to everybody who is a complainer in a case, fine, fine. If that's what it takes for it to work, that's great. The phrase, I'll let you, Annette, say it. The phrase that is now synonymous with Gislèle Pelicot is one that I think should be repeated constantly.
Shame must change sides. Absolutely.
Absolutely. It is the most powerful phrase. She was talking about whether or not she was going to change her name. And she said, the Pelco name is the name that I have given to my children. And she said, it's not for me to be ashamed. It's not for me to be ashamed. And the open powerfulness of saying that and standing in the face of the world is just absolutely breathtakingly brave. And I think she's an amazing woman.
And I think the other thing about it too is sending a message that this is not something that happens in poorer communities or in the global south or, somewhere far away.
Absolutely. Like the zero tolerance campaign. The zero tolerance campaign was very quick to say, this isn't about class, by the way, because it was always shown, of poorer surroundings and domestic violence. And I remember I said to Zoe, it struck me really strongly the picture that was taken of the woman sitting on a rug as well, beside a nice fire in a beautiful home, and saying, this person is also subject to domestic violence. And it's all women everywhere, all the time. Is that the name of a movie?
It's close. But we need that's what we need to do is we need to keep up that energy and we need to keep talking about it and not be bowed down by these belligerent voices on the internet. The internet is just an echo chamber. It's things happen in real life and we need to actually empower our girls and women to say no, enough's enough, right? Now, Gislèle Pelicot couldn't have done that, but if we had stronger things happening in society, Dominique, may not have felt as empowered. Those other men may not have felt as empowered. But I think we need to keep very strong with that. We need to be talking about it in schools. We need to be making sure that the police are absolutely up to speed on this, because it's been shown that time and time again that because they're very male dominant structures, the police and medicine, that they don't listen to women, that women are not listened to. And we're going to have to keep banging on about that until there's actual real change.
And again, you need to be educating the men and boys at the same time.
Yes,
the onus can't always be on us as women
100%.
to carry the fight.
It's not up to us to wear long skirts and cover ourselves up all the time. It's on men and boys to know that there are boundaries. Like, keep away. Anyway, it's been an absolute pleasure. If pleasure's the right word, it's been energizing to talk to you, Annette. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. I hope you found it as interesting as we found it to make it. Before we go, we just need to remind you to please keep getting in touch with us on our socials. Obviously, Twitter is problematic. We know a lot of people have moved away from there, but we've still got lots and lots of people that follow us on there. So please do get in touch. But we also use Instagram quite a lot. We use Facebook. We're not on there as much, but do try and persevere. And if we're doing any events, please come and say hello. Speaking of events, Claire, what should we be saying to people?
Oh, well, as you may know, dear listeners, our book's coming out in May of this year.
And in October in
already,
America.
oh, and October in America as well, very exciting. And people are already getting in contact with us, asking about the book and asking whether or not that they can get signed copies. The answer to that is yes, you can, and we're getting that sorted with our publishers at the moment, but they've asked us just to hang fire a wee bit. Secondly, the people have got in contact with us asking whether or not we could come and do talks at their bookstore, which we are very happy to do. We're very welcome to do. Just crowbarring our way into people's bookstores, whether or not they like it or not. So if you are a bookshop owner, or if you have a local bookshop that you would like us to come to, please do let us know. Please do get in contact. We'll pass on your details to the publisher, and the publisher will speak to the bookshop and try and make that happen. So we're going to be doing as many of the sort of talks as we possibly can to promote the book. And
Mostly
it's
at weekends. Can I
yeah,
just
mostly
say
at
that?
weekend because we're working
Weekends, because
mostly.
of Claire's court schedule and my teaching, it needs to
Yeah,
be weekends really. But
yeah.
we're
But
keen
we're
to travel.
we're really, really excited. We're now getting physical copies of the book to have
Yes.
a look at, and I cannot wait to share that with you. We will put it on the socials when it arrives. TikTok might be our first TikTok, Zoe.
We need to be in
Yeah.
the same city, maybe.
It's true. It's true. It might not be our first TikTok then. So please do get in contact with us if that is something that you want us to do. And finally, can I just say a personal vote of thanks? We gave a shout out asking for anyone who knows of a sound engineer to get in contact with us, because we would like a sound engineer to help us. Now, at the moment, what's happened is that Lola has been able to help us. I got a lovely contact from a woman whose husband runs a studio, and I said to her, she contacted us and said, look, I can help you. And I said, that's very, very kind. Thank you so much. I'll get in contact with Zoe, which I did immediately, and said, you'll never guess. Someone said that they'll help us. Should we do this? And she said, yes. And then what happened was that my phone deleted the text message and I cannot get back in contact with her. So if you are wondering what happened, that's what's happened. And if you would like to reach out again, although I don't blame you if you wouldn't at this stage, but if you'd like to reach out again, please do so I can get in contact with you. That would be very kind.
Just in case Lola gets too busy, but she should be fine. She should be fine. But I was going to say as well that, you know, that it's great to have Lola involved with it, because it means that we've got another young person who is, you know, interested. And we know that there's lots of younger people round about her age who are definitely interested in it, which is really nice. So find us on the socials, get in touch. We're looking forward to meeting more people as the year goes on and we're actually out at events. That'll be really nice. So, Claire, is there anything else you'd like to say at this juncture?
Yeah, I'd like to just say, stay quarrelsome.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Stay damesome.
Yeah.
Be a quarrelsome dame.
Be a quarrelsome dame. Yeah. We really need to get some necklaces made that say quarrelsome dame, don't we?
Really, I
We
would
need to
love
add that to our merch. If anybody's got any hot tips for how we would go about doing that, let us know.
Yeah, let us know. And I really, really promise to try not to immediately lose your email or text message by deleting it or auto-deleting it.
Wow. These things happen. It's not badness, like I said before.
I'm not sure it's not badness always gets you off the hook. But anyway, we'll keep going with that until we're caught out.
Okay, so that's been lovely to chat to you again, Claire. And I'll see you next time for the next episode of the Witches of Scotland podcast.
Bye.
Bye.
If you'd like to learn more about the Witches of Scotland, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for our mailing list at www.witchesofscotland.com to keep updated with the campaign. On that site, you'll be able to find how to link with us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.